do want to start out by just reminding you that anything good that you hear tonight, I want you to give glory to God for that. Any mistakes that are made, anything that you find troublesome or disturbing, blame me for it. It's not the blame of the host church or the Creation Research Society or my employer or anybody else. These are please just I'll take all the blame. Give all the glory to God. A lot of the things that we see in the fossils, let's just start out right here. We see fossils that just aren't where they are supposed to be according to evolution. Now, for example, this is a micrograph of fossilized pollen. Now, this fossilized pollen was found in a very special type of rock. The rock is called Precambrian rock. Now, according to evolution, life did not really evolve until this Cambrian explosion. At least advanced life did not. And in particular, pollen is produced, as you know, by pretty advanced plants like flowers and trees. And the early plants, according to evolution, did not make pollen. So we should not see pollen in the fossil record until very, very later on. Well, these were found in rocks before plants had evolved. How did it get there? Now, you might say, well, it was contamination. The scientists took extreme measures to make sure there was no contamination of the sample. First of all, they dug down deep into the rock. They extracted a sample. They did not open the sample. They put it right into a bag. They also had bags at the site, which they were going to compare with. They took it all back to the lab. In the lab, they set out samples of rock to collect pollen that would have been in the lab. And they also had this sample. The samples that they set out in the lab, no pollen was found on. So the possibility of contamination at that point is pretty well ruled out. So how did this fossilized pollen get into a rock that, according to evolution, should not have any pollen in it? Well, the answer is maybe evolution is wrong. Maybe it got there by some other means. But we also find other very interesting things. For example, this is a fossil of a dinosaur. Now, you can't see it real well, but right here is its stomach contents. Now, in this dinosaur, we find in its stomach fossils that on a careful examination are identified as birds. Now, according to evolution, again, birds evolved from dinosaurs. How is that possible if this dinosaur is eating birds? Now, don't ask me if it was a lunch or dinner or breakfast. I don't know. What's interesting, though, is it's very well preserved. It's preserved well enough that we can identify what it had as a meal. It's out of place. Something needs to be explained here. And here's another really good example. Now, this is a fossil of a mammal. Now, this mammal, again, it's kind of hard to see, but right here in its stomach contents, we find a dinosaur. Now, this is an artist's depiction of that mammal eating a dinosaur. And once again, evolution tells us that mammals did not come around until after the dinosaurs had died off. So how is this possible? How is it possible that this mammal is having a dinosaur meal? They must have been alive at the same time. So things are just out of sequence. They don't make sense. They need to make sense. We need to explain them. Just as we see also for polystrate fossils. Now, this is a fossil of the trunk of not a tree, but of something that's kind of like a moss. Well, it's related to the mosses, but this moss, now this right here, it's kind of hard to see, but that's a rock hammer, and that rock hammer is probably 10 to 12 inches tall. So this moss has a pretty good-sized trunk. Now, notice the layers that are laid down around this trunk. Now, how did this trunk, with a piece of its root attached, how did it get into these layers if layers take thousands to millions of years to deposit? Well, again, the answer must be they had to be laid down simultaneously. So perhaps the fossils are telling us something different. They're not telling us what evolution says. Here's what fossils are telling us. They are evidence of catastrophic formation. Anytime you see a fossil, it is not an indication of normal, slow, everyday processes. You don't see fossil formation because of everything happening in a normal, everyday, day-to-day, week-to-week manner. It's because something catastrophic happened. So all fossils tell us this. They are evidence of life in the past. The key is, what is your filter? How are you looking at these? What are you using to interpret them? If you have biblically based science, you're going to conclude that it's a catastrophic formation in a relatively short time. If you have an evolutionary based science, you're looking for long ages, extremely long ages, so you're going to use those to interpret what you see. So within this constraint of a biblically based science, the fossils tell us that there was a historic worldwide catastrophe. That's what we see, and that's what I'm going to show you this evening. We also see that animals and plant types are preserved through time. They don't evolve from one species into the next. And we also see that they were formed on a biblical time scale. So when I do science as a scientist, I do it from a biblically based science worldview. And these are things that are part of that biblically based science worldview, including the fact that there was a flood and it was worldwide. We refer to it as the flood of Noah. And plants and animals reproduce only to produce their own type, their own kind, is the word that many of us are familiar with from Scripture. There are no new species. So if you will, let's look at fossil formation. Different forms of fossils, but they tell us the same thing. So I need to take just a minute and look at the different types of fossils. Now, there are fossils that you can find from a process called permineralization. Now, this is a fossilized tree trunk out in Arizona, in the fossil forests of Arizona. In permineralization, all of the organic material that was in there gets replaced by minerals, and it's through a very gradual process, gradual enough that a lot of the fine details, even down to the cellular level, are retained. So you will find in these type of fossils, you can see the annual growth rings, or at least the growth rings of these plants. You can find fine details if there was a fire or other thing in this plant's history. You can see those type of details. So that's permineralization. Another type of fossil are those that we call trace fossils, and they can be eggs, or they can be tracks, or they can be footprints. So the dinosaur eggs, here's a footprint. You find these in the desert southwest in Arizona, New Mexico. You find them in that area. These footprints are from Africa, the Laetoli footprints. Now, these are really interesting footprints. They were found by a group of very famous evolutionists, and they found them and then covered them back up, and they really don't want anybody else to look at them. But one of the reasons is that, now this set over here, this is an animal that's running along. But can you see this? Looks like one person walking, and there's another person there. Do you all see those footprints? There are actually 3 sets of prints here. Can you see the third print? Now, first of all, let me point out that these 2 sets of prints, when they're analyzed from pictures like this, it's clear that these 2 individuals are walking side by side, and they're walking side by side in such a way that their hips have to be in contact. Now, we don't see that type of movement with apes and monkeys. This is generally something that is unique to humans, to walk like that. In fact, it's almost impossible to walk like that unless one of them has the arm around the other one. Have you found the third set of footprints yet? Do you see them? They're embedded in this set. There's an infant or a juvenile who's walking behind the large male in the footsteps of the large male. Now, that type of social structure is generally not seen, again, in the animal world. That's something that's somewhat unique to humans. So these are pretty much agreed are human footprints. Now, evolutionists say that they are related to the Australopithecines. Well, we can talk about who those folks are. They're hominids, they're upright walkers, but not considered to be humans. I think they look very human to me. Another type of fossil are casts and molds. So a mold is like this bivalve here, probably from maybe an oyster, or it could be from some other kind of bivalve like that. Left its impression in the soft material, and then that material, whatever that shell was, has been removed, but it left a cast of itself, and that's considered a cast. Now this is a mold where this is the fossil itself, this is where the animal was, and when we pry open the rock, part of it is left as an impression, the other side is left as a 3-dimensional, it's the other image of that type of fossil. Just amazing the different types of fossils that there are. Here's another one called compression fossils. Compression fossils are very carboniferous, like this bee, so that the animal itself got pressed and compressed and shoved in. It did not decay, and all of the carbon that was left behind, that's kind of what you see here is all of the carbon material. This is from the fluorescent fossil bed out in Colorado, very possibly from a volcanic eruption being buried in ash. And this is a fern that has been compressed and left behind. Mostly the organic material, mostly the carbon material. Just a few more types. The different types of fossils are just absolutely fascinating when we consider that they were all made from a catastrophe. So here are those made by either replacement or recrystallization. This is replacement. It's an ammonite. Now, the reason I've shown you this ammonite is the internal structure, the internal area of the ammonite has been replaced by a calcite crystal. It's a beautiful fossil. The external rock pieces have been removed to reveal this internal calcite crystal. In the bottom one, this is from a piece of coral, and coral is made also from calcium carbonate, but it's a very special mineral of calcium carbonate called aragonite. Now that aragonite has changed to just simply calcite. So it's been a recrystallization that has occurred to make that fossil, but we still have it, a lot of fine detail preserved. Sometimes we find coprolites and gastroliths. This is kind of a polite word for waste material. If you clean out a cat box, it's the stuff you take out. It's the poo. How's that? Okay, I don't mean to be crude, I just want to be clear. Yeah, so this is probably fish dung. This fish dung has it looks like other pieces of fish in it, so it ate something else. This is a piece of carnivorous dinosaur dung. This little scale right here is about 6 inches long, so you can see that was a relatively large animal. There was a time that making jewelry out of coprolites was considered, the thing to have. Yeah, not me either. It's okay, I'm fine with what I have. And finally, bioimmuration. Now this one's a little bit more difficult to understand. In bioimmuration, there was an animal, some type of animal, and on this animal, there was a hitchhiker, or maybe a parasite. And so the animal is out here, we don't see it anymore, but these little kind of X's here, that was the parasite or the hitchhiker that was on the animal. They left an impression that when this fossil was made, it left little holes. That's called a bioimmuration. Okay, so why? Why all this? The large variety tells us that there's something special about these. We have them preserved. Why? Well, how are fossils formed? Where do they come from? How do we get them? Let me see if I can just walk through this process. It's really straightforward. Now I'm going to use a Tyrannosaurus Rex drawing. T-Rex walking on the earth there. He's having a great time, wandering along. He dies. He falls over. Can you tell he's fallen over? He's laying down now. He fell down. He gets covered up. He doesn't decay. Animals don't eat him. He gets covered up with more dirt, layers of material that stop the decay process and preserve him there. Then that animal, the tissue, begins to decay away. It goes away. And the bone tissue gets replaced, either with minerals or something else. Maybe it's a cast, maybe it's permineralization, maybe it's recrystallization. But it gets left, and primarily all we have is just the impression of what's there, the shape of the bones, maybe the shape of the skin, maybe the shape of some of the internal organs. And then either a scientist comes along and uncovers those bones, uncovers what's there, uncovers the fossil, the minerals now, or maybe erosion pulls it out so that you can see what was in there. Now that's, in general, how fossils form, but how do they really form? Now evolution has told us, or they wanted to tell us, we're going to use the example of a fish, and I appreciate Answers in Genesis. I used their graphics for this. A fish dies, sinks to the bottom, lays there undecayed, while the sediment slowly covers it up, and then eventually you end up with the fossil there. Yeah, I have trouble with that because I have an aquarium, right? Yeah, when my fish die, they don't sink to the bottom. They float to the top. And if I don't get them out very quick, usually they become, a tasty meal for the other fish. It's kind of disgusting, I know. It makes you not want to eat fish. But they will eat the other fish, and it falls apart, and so you don't get articulated skeletons. So how do fossils really form? Well, the fish is swimming along. He's happy, he's alive, he's vibrant, and a catastrophe occurs. He gets buried spontaneously, quickly, instantaneously, buried in such a way that he is preserved. So fossils are evidence of catastrophe. That's what we have. When we find an articulated fossil, that's clear evidence that something happened rather rapidly, not in slow geological timescales. Well, what do you suppose that something was? Well, it's very clear from the revelation of the Creator himself. We are told that the world that then existed, Peter, in writing his second letter, says that that world was destroyed. If you use the New American Standard, or the English Standard Version uses this word perish. Now, both of those words are translating this Greek word. I'm not going to try to pronounce it for you. I'll let you phoneticize that one out. But it means this: to destroy fully. So it's not a small thing. It wasn't just a gentle event. It wasn't an everyday process. This was a huge catastrophe. Well, how huge? Well, it's very clear from the account in Genesis where it says all flesh died. Not some of it, not a little bit, not just the localized flesh, not just the flesh that was in the area where the local flood was. It says all flesh died that moved on the earth. And then it lists them: birds, livestock, beasts, swarming creatures, and all mankind. Everything on the dry land, in whose nostrils was the breath of life, died. It was utterly destroyed. Most of the fossils that we see, many of the fossils that we see, they are clear evidence of this catastrophe. So let's look at some of that evidence. Now, this is a single burial of 346 whales. This is the head of the whale. You can see the backbone here. Here's the tail going back over here. Now, they are buried in a matrix that's called diatomaceous earth. Now, diatomites are tiny little sea creatures that have skeletons, again, made of argonite or calcium carbonate. And as they die, their skeletons will float down to the bottom and form some of the sediment that we see on ocean floors. The White Cliffs of Dover, if you've ever seen pictures of that, is diatomaceous earth. Chalk, if you find some chalk, very often that can be some diatomaceous type environment. Well, these 346 individuals are found in what's called a whale graveyard. Now, does that mean that as whales got older, they realized it was about time for them to die, and so they very obediently swam over to the graveyard? You know, they picked out a headstone, maybe a nice casket, said, "I'd like you to sing this at my funeral." No, whales don't do that. And the skeletons of whales got a lot of calcium in them. Other animals will predate on them. They will eat their skeletons. None of these animals showed any evidence of predation, no evidence of being eaten, and they're all articulated. So no evidence of what we would see as normal decay, even in the bones. The only rational explanation is that this had to occur in a single catastrophic event. All 346 individuals buried simultaneously in one event. We also see this in other burials, in other fossils. Now, this is a fossil ichthyosaur. Now, these are two different ichthyosaur fossils, but I want you to notice ichthyosaurs gave live birth. So here's the baby coming out of this ichthyosaur. This is another one. How is that possible? How is it possible that these were buried in the process of giving birth? It had to be catastrophic. If they had died, if they had just died without any other event occurring and floated down to the bottom or been on the top of the water, that baby should have come on out. This is evidence of catastrophe. And we see this in other fish right in the middle of eating. And these are just 3 examples of many, many examples. Now, each one of these fish should have been able to swallow their meals without any difficulty. They should have been able to finish that meal. They didn't die because they were trying to eat this meal and choked on it. They died because some catastrophe stopped them before they could finish their meal. Now, here are some really fascinating ones. Does anybody recognize what this might be as a fossil, or even this? Those are fossil jellyfish. Now, if you've been to the ocean, if you've been to the beach, what can you tell me about jellyfish that get washed up onto the beach? Jellyfish are very fragile creatures. You put them up on the beach, they don't last very long, right? They won't even last a day. They will dry out. They'll die. So when we find fossilized jellyfish, the only rational explanation is that these had to be created very rapidly, very quickly. Now, this one is particularly interesting because you see here these little ripple marks that are going along here. Those are ripple marks that are created by very gentle tidal action. So somehow, gentle tidal action, which created these ripple marks, which again are very fragile, were captured and preserved as fossils. That requires a catastrophic formation. All evidence of catastrophe. Now here's one that's very fascinating. Now I don't know quite what to make of this. I very much suspect that these may be a post-flood fossil. These are two different animals. It's two different views of it. This animal lying down here, this is the artist's depiction of it. This is the animal that's on the top. And the mouth of this animal is biting the arm of this animal. So they're in the middle of a fight. And they are catastrophically buried. Now they were carefully dug out of the matrix to preserve them in this position. How did they get there? How did this happen? This was not because they killed each other and then agreed to stand in their three-dimensional poses until they could possibly be fossilized. No, the only rational explanation is this occurred by a catastrophe. So the first thing that I want to say to you tonight, fossils are evidence of a catastrophic event. Some kind of catastrophe made them. Some we can attribute to the flood of Noah. Some might be from other catastrophes, but fossils are the result of a catastrophe. Here's a fossilized dinosaur herd. So all of these individuals, it's a little bit hard to see because they're so small, but here's one, another one, 3, 4. You can see each one. Now these showed attempts of escape in the mud around them. It looks like they were trying to push their way out of where they had been buried. Now the other thing I want you to see is the shape of the neck. See how this neck is right here? See how it's bent? Each one of these, this one's bent back. It's kind of bent back like this. Now what scientists tell us is that's the result of asphyxiation. These animals died from oxygen starvation, and the muscles in their necks contracted and pulled them back into what they call this death pose. It's a catastrophe. So the first thing fossils tell us is that some catastrophic event occurred that preserved them for us to find. The second thing that they tell us is that there's no change over time. Now, evolution has tried to tell us that this is how life evolved. That gradualism, through time, started with a single-celled organism that very slowly and gradually mutated and changed. And all of life that we see today over an incredibly long period of time, all of the variety of life came from a single starting point. And so we should see in the fossil record this gradual, slow change in every type of animal. That's not what we see. In the fossil record, we see an animal late or long ago in time, and as we continue to find evidence of these, recent ones look just like the old ones. We find some that are incredibly old, and the ones that are very recent look just like the incredibly old ones. We don't see any of the changes through time. Now that caused evolutionists to propose a different approach, which they called at first punctuated equilibrium. But now they use a different word, and they simply say, well, evolution occurs rather rapidly on the geological time scale, so we really don't see these transitional forms. So instead we should see this, we'll see these creatures, but these links, they occur really, really rapidly. I find that rather convenient. I don't find it very scientific, but I find it convenient. Now here's an example. This is the proposed evolutionary relationship of the human family tree. This is us up here, Homo sapiens. Interesting, sapien means to know or to understand or to comprehend. And you notice that each one of these groups, there are no fossil linkages between them. They simply have to draw a horizontal line and then somehow say, we don't know how this link occurs. I don't know how this group is linked to this group. I just don't know, but I'm going to draw some lines because I want them, according to evolution, to be linked. Until we even get up into the sapiens themselves, or the Homo group, Homo habilis and erectus and floresiensis. And here we really don't know what's going on, but we just can't deal with this rapid evolution. So we draw some curved lines and say they've got to be related. We don't have the fossil evidence to show that. That's not what the fossil evidence shows. what do we see from Scripture? Scripture contains what some have referred to as the law of biogenesis. In Genesis 1:11, God said, all of the vegetation, plants will yield seeds, fruit trees will bear fruit, and each one will do it according to its kind. And it was so. So the law of biogenesis that we see represented in Scripture says plants only reproduce to make offspring that are the same as the parents. Apple trees don't make bananas. Apple trees make apples. Orange trees make orange. Citrus makes citrus. Grass reproduces grass. Wheat makes wheat. We see the same thing repeated related to animals. Animals only reproduce to make offspring that are the same as the parent. We see that in Genesis 1:24. Okay, now you may be saying, hold on, Dr. Marks, I thought you were a scientist. You've got a PhD in chemistry. Why are you using Scripture to talk about science? Because I understand that a rational approach to revelation says that a creator would reveal himself, and his revelation would be clear and understandable. That's a rational thing. And this creator has revealed himself, so it's irrational for me not to use his revelation as the preeminent piece of data for anything that I'm going to do. There's more on that if you look at some of my other presentations related to science in the Bible. So when we look at the fossil record, here's what we really see without putting any other lens on it, without trying to force fit it into my view. If I just look at the data, that's what I see. I see an animal far back in time, and when I find the same fossil of that animal in a more recent rock or more recent position, it looks the same without change. Now, we can divide these out, and we as humans do, to allow us to understand that they can be related by this structure that we've put on them. We like to organize things. We like to classify things as humans, as scientists. It helps us to understand them. So we do that by putting them in class and phylum and groups and families. And we do that. So how does that fit into the biblical picture of a catastrophe? Well, again, there was a flood. That flood followed the creation. So originally, each type of animal was created. By God's design, they had in them the ability to reproduce and have some variety within their type, but only 2 of each type, except for the clean animals where they had 7 and certain birds, were put on the ark and were brought through the ark. Those breeding pair became the groups that produced everything that we see on the face of the earth today. That's what the fossil record shows us. Third thing that we see from the fossil record really shows us that they do not change over time. Living fossils are clear evidence of this law of biogenesis. Now, there are many sources of these. A gentleman by the name of Jochen Chevron has cataloged hundreds of what he has referred to as living fossils, what we call living fossils. This is a wing impression. This is a fossilized wing impression dated at 65 million years old based on the rock that it was found in. This is a wing that was plucked off of a butterfly and laid down just for comparison. Now, I want you to just take a minute and look at the fine structure here and compare it there and here and there. Even out here underneath the letters, you can see these 2 look identical. Now, could I tell you that these came from the same animal? Of course not. I wasn't there when this animal died and left its wing to be fossilized. By the way, have you ever held a butterfly or looked at a butterfly? Are the wings very strong? Can they withstand being beaten up a lot? Do they hang around much? No, they're fragile. So how do we get this? Oh yeah, it was a catastrophe. Fossils are evidence of a catastrophe. So these 2, I'm not going to tell you they came from the same individual. I can't even tell you that they came from the same species. What I can tell you is that there's easily a rational approach that says these 2 have to be the same. To claim that they're different requires me to be irrational. So this 65 million year old, I don't believe it's that old, but that's what evolution says, animal, insect, is identical to this one. So insects over 65 million years have refused to evolve. Pretty cool. I wonder how they did that. They're not the only ones. Same is true for bats. So a 52-million-year-old bat fossil, identical, this is the skeleton of a modern bat, identical to modern bats. So bats apparently are able to refuse to evolve. Whatever the thing that causes creatures to evolve, bats are able to say, no, not me, not today, not going to evolve, don't have to. Not just bats, but also fish. Now here's just one of the most famous examples, the coelacanth. Now when the coelacanth was first found, it was heralded as that amazing transitional fossil because they saw these fins down here. They're on kind of little stubby pieces, and it's kind of armored and it looks very ancient. And they said this had to be a creature that lived next to the seashore, and obviously it's trying to turn itself into an amphibian because it's using these fins as legs and it's coming out on the ground. So it's trying to move itself out. Pardon me. So obviously they thought this has got to be a transitional creature. And that was great until 1938 when a fisherman pulled one up in a boat. Yeah. Off the coast of South Africa. Since then we found lots of them. And you know what we've discovered? They're deep sea dwellers. They prefer to live at 200-foot depths. Matter of fact, when you bring them into shallow water, they don't survive. They die very quickly. So science was wrong about these. Now, I don't know if they're edible. Somebody who tasted one has reported that they taste awful. Maybe that's why they're still around, because we just don't like their taste. Not like catfish. I don't think catfish are going to die out anytime soon, even though we're eating them as fast as we can, or at least I am, as fast as I can. So coelacanth refusing to evolve over 70 million years. Guess what? Not just insects, not just bats, not just fish, jellyfish. Remember those jellyfish? So a 500-million-year-old jellyfish, here's the fossil, looks just like a modern one. Another fossil, it's a little bit hard to see, but there's kind of a pointed area on this fossil, looks just like this jellyfish. Now jellyfish, again, when they get on the seashore, they dehydrate, they die, they go away. They are evidence of catastrophe, and they don't change over evolutionary timescales. Okay, so we've got insects, they don't change. We've got bats, they don't change. We've got fish, they don't change. Jellyfish, they don't change. What about trees? What about plants? Yeah, the evidence of plants, and frankly, I had like 50 different plants I was going to show you, but I thought, no, that's not going to work. You guys are not going to see it where I show you 50 different plants. Here's just one, sassafras fossil. Here's the leaf. Here's a living sassafras tree, identical. So how did these things refuse to evolve over time? Well, the rational understanding is that they don't evolve. God said, you reproduce after your kind, and that's what they do. And guess what? The same is true for mammals. This one is called the coelacanth of rodents. It's a fossil that was assigned. Now the fossil's down here. This is the fossil itself. This is an artist's depiction of the animal from this fossil. It was assigned an age of 11 million years ago is when this mammal fossil was made. Until 1996, when someone was walking through a meat market in Laos, that's over in Southeast Asia, and they saw this thing hanging there, and they thought, oh, wait a minute, that looks an awful lot like this fossilized animal. Now, there was a lot of confusion. People said, no, it's got to be related to something else. So they did DNA analysis on it, and were able to prove that this creature, here's a picture of a live one. Yeah, I don't want one as a pet either. I mean, I don't know if I'd call that cute. Still, I'm not sure I'd eat it either, but that's maybe if I was hungry. I don't know. They were able to confirm by DNA analysis that it's not related to any other creature in that area. So the coelacanth of mammals refusing to evolve for 11 million years, we got mammals too. So we either have to believe that something is in these animals that makes them special so that they don't have to evolve, or maybe we're wrong about evolution. Maybe creatures don't evolve through time. Maybe what we see in the cell, the design that God has placed in the cell that preserves the genetic material so that it does not change through time, maybe that's what we should believe instead. Now, these fossils also give us evidence of a worldwide catastrophe in that we find large fossil beds, extreme scale in the catastrophe. Let me start with coal. Did you know that coal, that black stuff that we used to burn to make energy, fossil fuel coal, coal is found in large deposits. Now, coal is made primarily from plant material. Now, this is just a picture of the coal deposits in the United States. Look at the size of this continuous coal deposit. And here's another one, huge, over in this area, a nice big one in Illinois. I'm going to take us up into this area. So this is Colorado, Wyoming, and we're going to look at this coal deposit right here. Now, this is, by the way, just to show you, here's some of the plant. This is a coal seam that has been mined out, and this is the ceiling of that coal seam. You can see some of the fossil plants that are in that coal. Now, coal is organic material. It's compressed plant remains. The Powder River Basin up in Wyoming and Montana, the Powder River Basin is estimated to be 10,000 square miles in size and on average 200 feet thick. Now, you need to know that it takes approximately 10 feet of raw organic plant material to make 1 foot of coal. So that means to make this 200 foot deep, 10,000 square mile coal deposit required 2,000 feet thick of plant material. Where did that come from? A slow, gradual process? No. This had to be a catastrophe, a huge catastrophe, one that was worldwide in its composition. Kind of interesting, the world's largest kind of drag line bucket was built and designed to pull the dirt off the top of this coal seam so they could get to it. They just kind of scrape the dirt off, get the coal out, and use it. Another example is the Dinosaur National Monument in Colorado. Now, this has over 1,400 bones that are just visible in the face of the rock. Thousands of bones were removed just in about 6 years, from 1909 to 1915. And the evolutionary scientists who look at this said it's clearly this was deposited by some type of flood. Now, most of these animals are disarticulated. The bones are torn apart from where they would normally be in a living animal. So some type of catastrophe killed these animals, pushed them along, and tore them apart and deposited them simultaneously in this one spot. There's another fossil bed in the desert Southwest. Now, this is just a map. It's probably hard for you to see if you're not familiar with this area, but this would be Arizona. Over here's New Mexico. There's Albuquerque. Up here's Colorado, Utah, and Nevada's over here. This is California. Mexico's down here. Here's Phoenix, Arizona. The yellow area right here is the Grand Canyon. Now, the Grand Canyon, if we had time to talk about the Grand Canyon and all the evidence that's there of a global flood, it's just astounding. That requires a presentation all by itself. But one of the things that's in the Grand Canyon is the Red Wall Limestone Formation. Now, the Red Wall Limestone Formation is one of the most characteristic pieces of the Grand Canyon. And it's called the Red Wall Limestone because it looks like a red wall. It's a huge drop-off. The Red Wall Limestone Formation covers this entire area. Now, it's sedimentary rock. It was deposited in a single event. In the Red Wall Limestone Formation, so this is a picture out into the Grand Canyon. You see this huge area here, this red wall. That's the Red Wall Limestone Formation. There's a piece of this that contains limestone that's about 7 feet thick, covers hundreds of square miles, and estimated to have 200 million nautiloid formations or nautiloid fossils in it. The nautilus is a sea creature. So how did we get 200 million creatures deposited in a single continuous geological formation? There's only one rational explanation. This was formed in a single catastrophic event. A very large one. Not slow, gradual processes, not just a regular river doing its thing, not just a localized flood. This had to be a global flood. This is an example of some of those fossils you can see here. Someone's added their shoe for us just for comparison of size. There are more. These fossil graveyards are all over the place. Let me take you to Michigan. So we're going to look at, here's the Great Lakes up here, you can see. We're going to go into Michigan. We're going to go to that spot right there in Michigan. That spot is called the Thunder Bay area. This is Thunder Bay right here. And into the Thunder Bay area is a limestone formation called the Thunder Bay Limestone. It's right next to the Squaw Bay Limestone. Squaw Bay is down here. So the Thunder Bay Limestone Formation, there are fossils in it which contain corals, colonies of animals, brachiopods like clams, crinoids like sea urchins that are in it. There are estimated to be billions, that's billions of animals in this single continuous limestone formation. How do you have that many? How do you create that kind of burial in normal day-to-day processes? You can't. That's irrational. Clear evidence of a global flood. Here's some of those fossils that they see from the Thunder Bay Limestone Formation. And then finally, the last one I'll show you is from Vallejo, Spain. Already they found over 8,000, almost 9,000 distinct individuals in this. Turtles, crocodiles. It's considered the largest fossil graveyard in Spain, possibly even in Europe. And it was, according to evolution, every animal in here was deposited there by a flowing event, some type of flowing water. Catastrophe. So fossils are clear evidence of catastrophe, and this catastrophe was not localized, it was global. Now they were formed on a biblical timescale. These fossils were not formed millions of years ago, not 70 million, not 50 million, not 11 million, not 200 million, much less than that. And we see that in the soft tissue that we find in fossils. Now, probably the most famous of these is the soft tissue that was found in a Tyrannosaurus rex femur. Now, that's this bone right here. So this is an artist's depiction of that animal. The femur is the largest bone that's in that animal. Now, a scientist by the name of Dr. Mary Schweitzer, she's not a creationist, she's an evolutionist. She's been studying femur bones of Tyrannosaurus rex for a long time. And to get to this particular animal, they had to helicopter in. Now the bone was so large that they could not get it out in one piece, so they broke it open. And when they broke it open, they found soft tissue inside. It created an incredible stir in the scientific community. And here's some of the pictures of that. So first of all, this piece right here, kind of behind the N and D, this is a piece of tendon that is still flexible. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. This animal is claimed to be 70 million years old, yet it has tissue in it that is still flexible. It's still bendable. Under microscopic examination, they pulled out this piece that looks like a blood vessel. They found things that look like red blood cells. This area looked soft and moist, and these pieces, well, they look like tendons. Now, how is that possible? I'm here to tell you it's not. I am a chemist. I deal with the molecules that make this stuff up. They are fragile molecules. They don't stick around for a long time, especially in any kind of oxygen environment. Now, if you handed me some red blood cells and you said, Dr. Marks, I want you to preserve those red blood cells, I would do everything that I knew how. I would bring every piece of chemistry, every piece of science to bear to preserve those. But I have to tell you that I am convinced that if you came back in 1,000 years, now, I know that we're not going to be here in 1,000 years for you and I to do this, but if we could, that at best, I'm going to hand you some tar, some goo, some oil, because it's just, even under my best scientific, technical abilities, I can't make it last 1,000 years. Now, I want you that to sink in for just a minute. What does that say about this T-Rex bone? That's not the only place they found it. They went and started looking. And so they found this 80 million year old dinosaur, and they did the same kind of techniques on these bones, and they were able to pull out, again, biomolecules. Not minerals, not rock, not fossil, but molecules like you would find in a living creature. How is that possible? How could they find this collagen, this biomolecule, in this supposedly 80 million year old creature? Well, some people propose that maybe it was because there was so much blood. Maybe there's so much iron. Maybe there's something special about the fossilization process of these unique individuals. And so another group of scientists went and got a a Triceratops horn. Now the Triceratops horn is very much like your fingernail. It doesn't have a lot of blood vessels in it. And they took this Triceratops horn that was dated based on the rock that it was found in by evolutionists being 65 million years old. And they found in it, again, evidence of soft tissue. Not just soft tissue, but they found what looked like some of the actual cells, the biological cells that are responsible for generation of bone, or generation of this horn. How is that possible? That should not be there. It cannot last that long. Well, again, someone said these were just special. It was the conditions that they were preserved in. So another group of evolutionary scientists said, well, what about bones that haven't been preserved? So they went to a museum and they pulled these bones out of the drawer in the museum. These bones were actually dug up in 1916, so they've been sitting in this drawer for 100 years. And they said, okay, so they haven't been preserved. There's nothing special about them. When we found these fossils, they were in such poor shape that nobody even cared about them. They weren't even worried, didn't think they were that good a quality of a fossil. They tested them for soft tissue. They found protein, red blood cells, and other evidence of soft tissue, even though they'd just been thrown in a drawer and left there for 100 years. Now again, this stretches the imagination if you're going to claim that these creatures are millions of years old. Scientifically, that's irrational. Scientifically, that's impossible. Okay, so how long can they last? A separate group of scientists said, we've got to figure out how long these materials last. So we're going to do some tests and just try to figure it out. And even though evolution claims this animal is 80 million years and 70 million years and other ages, the scientists who did the test on the biomolecules said at the most they could stick around for about 5,000 years. Anything beyond that is scientifically unreasonable. So science itself, evolutionary science, not creationists, not a bunch of Ron Marxists trying to set out to prove creation. These are evolutionists, have set a limit on any fossil that we find soft tissue in of 5,000 years. Now, of course, I believe it's much younger than that. So what does the fossil evidence show? There was a catastrophe. It was worldwide. Species do not change into other species. They are preserved by the very law that God established. Animals reproduce after their type, after their kind. And they are formed in thousands, not millions of years ago. Fossils are clear evidence of biblical history, of the biblical narrative, of what the Creator has told us about himself.